What's the family tea that you found out once you got older?
I want to talk about this more in detail because I kind of touched on it before. My mom and dad always told us they met on a blind date. That's what they said. They divorced when I was a kid. It was lies. It was so much lies. Apparently, my dad had just moved from Michigan and went to Texas, and he was like having a hard time getting on his feet. So my dad was like, peddling some drugs back in the day. It was like the 80s. And my mom, poor, not a lot of money, goes into the bar, and my dad was selling some Coca-Cola, and my mom was like, hey, can I buy some from you? And then my dad was like, yeah, you can. And then she ended up going home with him and never paid him, and then they ended up getting into this long marriage and having children and everything else. My dad's awesome, my mom's awesome, but it's just a really, really funny story. And like, my mom has no idea that I know. Like, my dad told me, but like, my mom has no idea, and she would lose her shit if she
What's the family tea that you found out once you got older?
So when I was a kid, my grandmother drank a lot of coffee. It wasn't like coffee that everybody else was drinking at the time, because she had like her own special coffee, and she would drink it all the time in her coffee mug. Everywhere we went, she had her coffee mug that she would take with her. She would put it on the dashboard of her car. She drank this coffee so much that there was a ring on the dashboard from where she kept her coffee cup. But when I was older, I found out that gallon jugs of Carlo Rossi white wine aren't coffee. They are alcohol. And she definitely drove us kids around constantly with a mug of wine on her dashboard.
What's the family tea you found out when you got older?
So this story is about my dad's father, my grandfather. So there's a lot of side notes, so I'm going to break them down for you. Side note number 1, my parents are divorced. Side note number 2, my mom has known my grandfather since high school, so she's had a long history with him, okay? And side note number 3, my dad's not exactly forthcoming with a lot of things. So this story, I don't think I would have ever found out about it had my mother not said anything. So please, 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 please do not bash her. Okay. So 2 weeks before my grandfather passed away from cancer, okay, my mom was in town because it was being known throughout family that his time was coming. It was only a matter of a week, days, who knew, right? So my mom wanted to come in and say goodbye. So my mom, seeing that I am falling apart, right? Because in my eyes, my grandfather could do no wrong. This man to me was everything. In fact, I spent 2 years while he was in the hospital, every free day I had, instead of going out with my friends or, having the luxury to be able to do things I would like to do, I was in DC visiting him at the hospital, making sure he was okay. So my mom took me to a bar to try to help me decompress, and she told me all these wonderful stories about my grandfather, but she said there was something about him I didn't know that she wanted me to be aware of. So like I said, my parents are divorced, okay? They divorced when I was in my mid-20s, just like when my grandfather divorced my Nana, my dad was also in his mid-20s. And the reason why a divorce happened was after having 3 kids, my Nana exactly was not skinny. So obviously her body went through a lot of changes. My grandfather worked for the government, and so he felt the need to have someone young, skinny, beautiful, who could be a positive influence when he went to social events, you name it, right? There comes in my step-grandmother, the mistress. Yes, he had an affair, apparently. And this went on for a while until I guess he fell in love with her, fell out of love with my Nana, and decided to divorce my Nana to marry the mistress. Okay. Now, he basically started over a new life with her, and they went to adopt my other aunt, who is actually a few years younger than me. So that was the tea. Had I had not known, I think I would have been okay, but it changed some perspectives, but, I still love my grandfather, and I hope, he's doing okay wherever he's at,
What's the family tea that you found out once you got older? I'll go first.
So my grandfather on my dad's side, who practically I always considered to be my dad because he was amazing, he was a deacon at this really good church in New Jersey. He was a great man of God, loved the Lord, had the beautifulest heart you could ever even imagine. And I used to see pictures of him, of this little boy, black and white pictures, in a cotton field, like with hardly no clothes, no shoes, just sitting in a cotton field. Always sitting in my grandmother's house. Never knew what the hell that was about. And it wasn't until years, I'm talking about years later, when I started my journey, and Spirit was like, you need to know your past before you can learn the past of the true POCs. I know that sounds deep, right? But yeah. So found out from my uncle, oh yeah, that picture, that was your grandfather. And he was born in South Carolina. Mind you, all my life I was told that this man was born and raised in Bayonne, New Jersey. And come to find out, he forged his own birth certificate just so he can get into the military after his plantation became free. Now, my grandfather on my mother's side, I've never met him. I was estranged from him because he was estranged from my grandmother. Anyway, we always considered him to be like a deadbeat dad, a deadbeat guy, just not a great guy. And years later, we did find out about him that he became a Christian, a man of God. But the reason why he didn't come back to Rhode Island was because he was a big-time gambler. And he owed, and if you know anything about Rhode Island, it is mafia city, and he owed people some money. And the only reason why he left was because he was running from his life. Also, when his father died, he had to ask permission of our tribe if he can even step foot in the state of Rhode Island just to be at his father's freaking wake, not the funeral. And they only granted him permission just to come to the wake, and then he had to get his ass back to where he came from. And I just found this out years later. Years later.
What's the family tea that you found out once you got older?
The family's favorite uncle is a pedo, but it's okay though, because it's not like he's gay or anything.
I look like shit, but this is. So my great-great-grandfather, he would travel a lot, disappear for months for his job. Back then, they didn't have cell phones. My grandma, my great-great-grandma, would stay home and take care of my grandma and her sisters. The thing is, my grandma got really sick. So back then, slavery wasn't as prominent. It had just kind of slowed down in the island. But what they had was, if a family had a black kid or a kid they couldn't afford, they would give it to another family, and the other family would have them, feed them, clothe them, everything. But the family would use them as maids, so they could win what they're getting. Well, my grandpa got this lady, and by lady, I mean a 13-year-old, to come in and take care of my grandma. Chinging, my grandma dies after giving birth to, I think, 13 children. This little girl is now 16 and suddenly pregnant with my grandfather's baby. So she does the same thing as my grandma did, which is give birth to a bunch of babies. Fast forward in history, we thought that, 13 from a woman and 12 from another was going to be like the most our grandpa did. No. To this fucking day, we have people from different islands in the Caribbean who reach out to our family telling us that they finally found what family they belong to, and somehow they're connected to us. And there has been 52 kids that have surfaced around the Caribbean that were my grandfathers, fathered by my grandfather. So basically, my great-grandfather was just giving it all to everybody, getting women pregnant everywhere, and then walking away. So yeah, I have a shit ton of great uncles and aunts. A shit ton. I'm talking about, like, not even 2 years ago, we found 3 of them. There's like 64 kids now that are officially, like, his kids, including the 12 my great-grandma had, and then what I called my great-grandma because she was the one that was alive when I was born. She had 12, so.
What's the family tea that you found out once you got older?
Okay, this could not be more perfectly timed because I just found out some juicy info. So I never knew my mom's dad because he died before I was born. So everything I've learned about him has come in the form of stories from my mom and her sisters. Well, a couple of weeks ago, we were at a family thing, and my aunt had some stories that even my mom didn't know. My mom does remember that sometimes as kids, he would bring them to the bar and set them up at a table and drink with his buddies. But these buddies of his often were the bar owners themselves. Well, why did he know so many bar owners, you may ask? Well, apparently during Prohibition, he worked as a collector and would go around and pick up money from all of the speakeasies. Pair that with his Irish heritage. Y'all, I think my grandpa was in the Irish mafia.
What's the family tea that you found out once you got older? I'll go first.
Grandma spilled the tea to me. So, for years, had a cousin that would come around with my other cousins, his older siblings, and he was only a year or two older than me. Didn't think anything of it. Cool beans. I really liked him. He was super cool. And I remember being a junior in high school taking my grandmother to take her driver's test. She was in her 50s and lost her driver's license. I think she let it expire, I don't know. But I took her to take her test, and she was on oxygen all the time and just fresh out of the give. And she tells me, I said, oh, well, aren't they coming in to go hunting? I don't know, I just hope they don't bring him. Why, Grandma? Why can't my cousin come? He's not your cousin. He's your uncle. Your grandpa's a hoe.